Okay, good morning. Um, I'm doing a replacement video for the Huebner reading uh, on religious metaphors. And I will again try to keep this to at or just under 30 minutes. Huebner, give a little background real quick. Huebner um, was very important to my dissertation. Particularly this, um, particularly this article essay. And this was brought to me by a friend, Vicki Hillis, um, who was doing the editing on this of his essays for the book that this comes out of. And so she and I would talk a lot about Huebner through this process. Anyway, Huebner's still with us, as far as I know. I've not seen anything. He's been retired probably around 20 years. He was at Columbia University Teachers College. He taught leadership. His first degree is in biology. He became a science teacher, alternative certification, and that began his education career. He left education teaching for a while to pursue a divinity degree at Columbia's Union Theological Seminary, which is just across the street. So in New York, no. So let me. I guess I need my glasses out. Let me share my screen. Okay, here are my notes, and follow along with this. So Huebner writes a lot about language. Most of his early essays are about language, and I guess most of his later essays are about language. So, and I think he comes out of a time where there are a number of new philosophical understandings that revolve around language. And one of those people that he paid attention to was a person that I paid attention to as part of my dissertation as well. That was Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was a language philosopher. He was Austrian, but he worked out of England. So he worked at Cambridge. He studied and got his doctorate at Cambridge and continued to teach there until his death. I think he was 51. He died of cancer. Very interesting life for anyone who would like to pursue someone. There are a number of very good books on Wittgenstein, a number of very journalistic books, if you're interested in that sort of thing. So Huebner's search for language led him to reject the social science metaphors that we continue to commonly use to explain the education process or schooling, right? So, change over time, learning as a stamping in process. even for Dewey, some of those metaphors, or or ultimately behavioralistic, and so mechanistic to some degree, less so, but some degree. So the arc reflex, paper reflects some of that. So this was fairly common to think about that. It really begins with Herbart, German psychologist, who has a great deal of influence on the psychology of education early on. And to those of you who took 504 or taking 504, you'll get introduced to Hubbard and the Martins, his followers in the United States, in the Klebart book on the struggle of American curriculum. Once again, in this piece, we see Whitehead reappear. Again, Whitehead is from Cambridge as well. Isn't really all that he knows Wittgenstein. Apparently didn't like Wittgenstein a whole lot. And really I don't find any influence of Wittgenstein on Whitehead. So, but Huebner, in the early part of the paper, draws upon Whitehead's Aims of Education, is the essay, which Dahl talks about briefly. And Huebner is reflecting upon the last few paragraphs of that essay, where Whitehead talks about the essence, this is a quote, the essence of education is that it be religious. Pray, what is religious education? I thought I fixed that. You see my mechanics error. So, so pray, what is religious education? And so Whitehead talks about in relation to religious education, talks about duty and reverence. So duty, basically, for Whitehead is he warns educators that where knowledge could have changed the issue for a student's life, right? So if the knowledge you are teaching leads to a better life for that student, then ignorance has the guilt of vice. Okay, and that's really pretty strong language. Where knowledge could have changed the issue, ignorance has the guilt of vice. And I think some of you might agree with me based on what I've read so far, that the testing curriculum, where we teach to the test, has the guilt of vice, would be the argument, because it leaves so much out of what could help that student live a better life. Okay, so we're teaching for the sake of a test, not for the sake of life. The others, so that's duty. The other side is reverence, which is kind of abstract in that Whitehead says that reverence holds within it the understanding that in the present moment, you have an eternity of time, that the past, present, future are held within every present moment. And I talk about that in different places as what I would call the eternal present. And I would argue, leads to this notion of presence. The importance of presence for a teacher, where so much more can be taught in that moment. So Huebner takes that and he changes duty to responsibility. He changes both of those concepts, and he wants to talk about responsibility rather than duty. And so that gives you a sense of a different generation. Huebner coming out of the Depression, the Second World War, the transformation of, the liberalization, I guess you could say, of higher ed. He's at Columbia in the 60s during the time of the student protests. So he's influenced by all this new philosophy, which includes Wittgenstein and many, many others. And this is what he writes about. So he's trying to soften duty up. But here we see the beginning of his thought process of wanting to move beyond the mechanistic language of the social sciences, of behaviorism in psychology, of the mechanisms of sociology in particular, that really treats the human person as a kind of machine. Okay. Wittgenstein famously wrote that I'm paraphrasing, that I look upon another person always as if they have a soul. So Wittgenstein opposes this kind of mechanistic in his later philosophy, or his early philosophy was somewhat mechanistic. So he goes through a transition as well. So I know I'm talking about a lot of different things here, but so Huebner, coming out of his divinity degree, his working on theology, seizes upon spiritual language, okay, as a way to talk about what we do when we educate human beings. That it's not merely a mechanistic change, that there's something more to this process. And this is, I think, is a kind of gift that Huebner gives to educators by providing us. Now, many of you look upon any, because of what you're told to or not to teach, you think any religious ideas or an anathema or K-12 school. Well, but he's not talking about, if you read closely in the beginning, he's not trying to present this as a religious teaching. He's trying to talk about it in terms of metaphor, okay, which is perfectly fine, because he recognizes that there's a divine spark in each of us that is lured to the transcendent, to this gift of transcendence that is provided a student, a kind of conversion, if you will, through the educational process, not strictly through schooling, but through the larger educational process. And this is what he's talking about. I see what I did. Okay. I think I I uploaded the wrong piece. Anyway, I had edited this, but it still fine. So key in Huebner's thinking, and we can think of this in terms of a nod to diversity, but the key to Huebner's thinking about the religious metaphor is the metaphor of the stranger, which is definitely an Old Testament trope, if you will, from a literary perspective. When the stranger appears, God appears. So something important is occurring in and around the stranger. We often think of them as angels, but so wherever an angel appears, it's recognized as a stranger, whether it's with Abraham or Sodom and Gomorrah, in other places throughout the Old Testament. And that the stranger is that which is alien, the unknown. Sometimes the stranger is, these are my words, sometimes the stranger is novelty. Sometimes the stranger is antagonist. So the stranger is what we would call the radical other. That notion of the other comes out of some other philosophical understandings. And so we can think of, our students as the stranger. We think of ourselves as the stranger to the students. So Huebner is basically arguing, and I agree, that when we meet the stranger, there's possibility for learning. We can think of content as the stranger as well. So the idea that we're meeting the unknown and we can learn from that unknown. Of course, we are trapped in our language. Huebner does not like the word learning, in part because we know that not only can animals learn, machines now can. I'm not sure what he would say about AI these days. That would be an interesting question for him. And really a lot of this is tied to the Greek ideal of philosophy as knowing oneself, that we are changed by the other. It's not only that we obtain knowledge of the other, but we are obtaining knowledge of ourselves in that transformation. And this is part of that transcendent notion. So education comes from the Latin term educare, which is a leading out or leading into. So the teacher is often seen as the leader, but as we read in Harvey, the teacher can be led by his or her students just as easily. So the stranger leads us and we lead the stranger. So there's this reciprocal, symbiotic relationship of knowledge between us and the stranger. Okay. So education, this is a quote from the essay, education is the call from the other that we may reach out beyond ourselves and enter into the world, enter into life with the life around us. Okay, so we're no longer isolated. We see this as we move from the family into school, into the kindergarten, into first grade. And we know for many that that's a discomfort Every time we move, grade level, we move into middle school, we move into high school, we move into college. Teachers often talk about, well, I'm getting you ready for this. And the truth is, we're never ready for that move into the next level. And just as we become comfortable in one, we have to move into the other. And I think this is an important notion as well. So, okay. And so the stranger also provokes a silent question in each of us. That is, who will I become? What is the meaning of life? What is my purpose? Okay. So these are some, this is very deep on certain levels. So it's important to think about, and I'll be looking forward to your glosses. Okay. So education is the openness to a future beyond all futures. It is also a protest against current forms. So those of you who in your glosses feel the need to resist, at least on those pages, the current curriculum, then you're engaging in an educative process through that. In the current form, we can recognize that again in religious metaphors as a kind of idolatry. And we see that particularly in the testing culture, that there is almost a worship of the test as an idol, the be all and end all of our lives in schools. So, to finish up, love is the source of educational transcendence. First act of teaching is love, according to a scholar I follow from the early part of the 20th century named Edith Stein, who some of you may know as St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. And, because without love, education comes to an end, because we can no longer get beyond ourselves. We are no longer open to what is new. We're no longer open to the other. And we also recognize love is a decision. Love is a decision to reconcile. Okay. So love is a decision. I actually get that from Wittgenstein. He says, when I talk about that in 250 sometimes, my self-help class, people are stunned. They've never thought of love as a decision. So it's, I decide every day to love my wife, and she decides every day to love me. When I stop making that decision, what are we left with? After knowing each other for 45 years, married for 41 now. There's still passion, but there's also sort of comfort too, but you still have to make that decision. And so we decide to love our students. And it's usually personal at a beginning level, but Edith Stein talks about how we have to quickly move that notion, the Greek notion of eros. There's almost a romanticism. Have to move that quickly to a more familial or even if we can, to a sensible contact, to a spiritual. And it's a love from the person to the content. Also. So education is not something, this is an important idea. Aquinas talks about this. Love is not something we do to others. It is what we do to ourselves. It happens to us. Okay. So I can teach ideas, but you're the one, through these ideas, you're the one educating yourself. This is what's a fallacy around testing, is that somehow we teach knowledge to others rather than recognizing that the other teaches themselves, and knowledge happens to themselves. That's why trying to get everyone to give you a single right answer, particularly at a deeper level of knowledge, is counterproductive. So, well, that's it. Let's stop sharing that. And we're under 30 minutes, so I'm very happy. I hope everyone, if you have any questions, please let me know. And hope this helps you write that across. And I know I'm about a day late on this. Sorry for the problems with Adobe Connect. I was not given a warning about that. So here we go.